Okay, it's the appointed time, and we'll get started. My name is Nelson Mellis. I'm chairman of the Brookfield WPCA. This is a public information session, and it is, since this was, this whole study that's been done has been part of the Clean Water Fund program. Part of the obligation that we have is to do public information meetings, and there was a legal notice published in the paper. It's on our website as well. The Brookfield Water Pollution Control Authority will hold a public informational session in the auditorium at Brookfield High School November 3 at 7 to 9 p.m. The purpose of the meeting is to have the study conducted by C.D. Smith presented to the community on the Candlewood Lake Drainage Area Wastewater Management Study, and to discuss potential, to get potential comments with respect to it. Background information may be found at brookfieldwpca.org/Candlewood. Okay, sheet 2. This is a meeting that we have scheduled concerning the study of the feasibility of extending sanitary sewer service to the Candlewood Lake area. There was no other agenda items at the meeting, and the meeting is being live recorded, and you'll be able to review it on YouTube. There's already a link on the website for it. And the public notice was in the Danbury News Times. This meeting is for the purpose of presenting factual information and data bearing on this topic, and to allow expression of opinion by interested parties. C.D. Smith has been retained by the WPCA for the study and will be making the presentation. Please note there are no recommendations or decisions to be made or a vote at tonight's meeting. The meeting is strictly for the purpose of sharing information and receiving comments. Additionally, property owners in the project study area will be sent a voluntary survey in the coming weeks for inclusion in the final study report. This is a draft report, and we expect that to be delivered, to be made available to the public on or about probably for the holidays, the beginning of the year. So I just wanted to also give a bit of a timeline for the project and how this study came about. And that is, first of all, at no time has it been decided that sewers must be installed at Candlewood area. And so we're going to lead off with that that's not been decided. The study is focused on the question if sewers would be beneficial, what would be the cost? A number of agenda-driven videos, you should know this, have been presented that are inaccurate and really untrustworthy, especially the discussion of wastewater treatment. There's been no opportunity to engage with WPCA or rebut what they've published. We have no idea if that represents the sentiment of the community. Some owners have encouraged us to take the study further, and we encourage you to listen with an open mind to what's been professionally prepared, and I think you will find it reasonable. The studies were requested and cheered on by the town health department, First Light, owner of Candlewood Lake, Candlewood Lake Authority, the Western Connecticut Council of Governments, and Connecticut Deep. In January of 2018, the health directors and sanitarian sent a letter urging sewers to be considered due to the high level of non-compliance, the age of the septic systems, and small lots. In fall of 2018, a QBS process was initiated. That means it's a quality-based selection system. You select the engineering group, team that you think would do the best job. And with that, a Clean Water Fund grant was requested, or submitted. This was in a time frame when milfoil was an issue, fouling the lake. You might remember that. In February of 2019, notice of a grant award for the study project was given by Hartford. In May of 2019, the project started. In August of 2019, well contamination was discovered with boron, which is from laundry, artificial sweeteners, high nitrogen, and PFAS. And we didn't test for pharmaceuticals, but they would expect to be there. In April of 2020, study reports were finalized and a newsletter issued. And all of these are open and available on the Brookfield WPCA website. With apparent septic system stress on the water supply and on the lake, another grant was sought by another QBS process and subsequently awarded by Connecticut Deep. In fall of 2021, in December of 2021, a study plan was prepared and executed to determine how optimum source system options would be built and at what cost. Sorry, I need some water, but in September of 2022, a public information meeting was held with comments were taken and taken into account for further work. In 2022 and 23, we worked on that plan, evaluating numerous options, including continuing the use of sorry. Sorry. There's an angel out there. So that study plan with numerous options will be presented tonight. A draft report in October of last month was delivered to the WPCA and approved for public presentation with tweaks. And November 2023, right now, the final draft report is available and presented at this public information meeting, and the final report will be available after considering the public comment today. So, I'm gonna introduce CDM Smith. CDM Smith, the presentation is going to be by Joel Liberty to start, and then Christy Wagner, the bulk of it. Dan Murphy is an engineer that's worked closely with the team. And then Greg Dembowski is going to moderate the public comment time, and I'll let him speak to that when the time comes. So for now, Joe.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, everybody. My name is Joel Liberty. I'm a Senior Vice President with CDM Smith. Happy to see you all here tonight, just like the last public meeting we had. I love seeing a great attendance like this. So we're going to, if you just bear with us, Christy and I are going to give a presentation. It's probably going to be about 40 minutes. Please just bear with us. When we're done, we certainly will have questions. We can come up and ask questions, and that's what we're really here for, is to hear input from you. Just wanted to give a high-level overview. The reason for the study stemmed from original environmental concerns. There's a 1985 consent order from Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. That consent order was actually predated by consent order number 4 from the 1970s. We don't have our hands on it, but basically that consent order asked the Brookfield to look into whether or not the on-site septic systems were working and whether or not a management system was appropriate or not. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. Also in More recently, in I think 2018, it's on a coming up slide, Brookfield Sanitarian and Director of Health had concerns in a letter that I'll read from the letter. The current study provided extensive review of alternatives with costs. We tried to include everything for costs, road repair, whatever we thought, connections, every single cost that we think would be borne with a sewer project as well as a septic, maintaining a septic project, we intended to include. It's summarized in a presentation that Christy will be given. It's further detailed in the report. We brought 2 copies of the report. It's available online. There's various places where you can show your camera and you can get a link right to the report. Sewer project, as Nelson mentioned, is not intended to be pushed on the public. There's no recommendation at this point to move forward with sewers, so that might be good to hear for some of you. This meeting is intended just to provide a summary of options. We met with you all back in September of 2022 with a kickoff meeting for the study. We've now completed the study. We have a draft report online. We felt like it should be presented to you to say what it is that we found, what the conclusions were, and allow you to comment on it. The information and the options evaluated in this study will remain valuable and relevant in the future. Even if the report goes on the shelf, could be 5 years from now, 10 years from now, it might have value to take it off and revisit it. Additionally, we did some studies where we did topographic studies, we did geotechnical studies, located the water main in a few locations. All of these things will have relevant value to them. We did want to upfront acknowledge the prior public comment. You guys had a lot of comment when we had the initial public meeting process. Wanted to state up front that this current scope was not a needs evaluation. There was a lot of comments on the needs for the project, which was based on a study that was done before this current study. I understand that there's a little confusion there, but this study was not to advance those needs, the needs evaluation. We acknowledge and we heard the feasibility and affordability challenges. Clearly, more grant would be needed in order for the project to move forward. More grant was obtained, then the cost for everybody would go down. I'd like to give an example of Old Lyme. Many of you may be familiar with it. They have a sewer project that's around the same dollars. It's a little over $50 million. The community for the sewer project was actually, they knew how much it cost and how much that they need to pay, and they actually rallied around it to try to get more grant. In the end, they wound up getting close to a 50% grant to put the sewers in. They got the senator involved. There's a lot of information that's out there that you can look into, but that's the kind of way that you could reduce the cost on you for implementing a project like this. In that example, is up to 50% grant. If we were to sewer the project, we wanted to clarify a couple things right up front. We know that there was a prior recommendation to maintain septic tanks while then either pumping or flowing by gravity to a system that would be in the street that would take the flow away, that you still would be required to pump out the solids from your septic tank. We are not recommending that that gets moved forward. That prior process was referred to as step steg. You'll see a slide in the future, but I know some of you are familiar with what that is. Prior benefit assessment calculation would need to be reevaluated. We heard a lot of comments on the way that Brookfield has in the past put the cost onto the users that would in fact be tying in. We understand that it was up to 10% of the value. We think that in this particular case, given the vast difference in the property values for the area, if a project actually moved forward, we would need to revisit exactly how that would be calculated. Any sewer project was never intended to facilitate additional development or redevelopment. The area that we evaluated is already fully developed. It was just to look at sewering the area within the Candlewood Peninsula and directly around it as it relates to the environmental need. It was never intended to look at additional development. Sewer capacity and discharge needs to be addressed. We certainly heard a number of those comments. Preferably the discharge would be to Danbury. Quite frankly, right now we have not addressed it because it does not seem clear to us whether a project is going to move forward. The logical place for the sewer to go is to Danbury. How you would do that is you would go talk to Danbury and you would ask them for more capacity. You'd go through a process. It likely would cost some dollars, not going to be in the tens of millions of dollars, but the only reason you would go to them and ask for capacity is if you actually were going to use the capacity, because you would be paying for a capacity that you didn't use. So if a project was going to move forward, that's where we would look into finding the logical place for the sewer to go, which should be to Danbury. And then the last bullet here, we know that one of the comments that you made as well was that maintaining septics should be evaluated. And that was a great comment. We added it to our study. We just added at the bottom here that a septic inspection program, if that was selected, should be considered given the age of the septics, the density of the projects, and environmental sensitivities, which we'll go through. So, overview, going to give a quick introduction in history. I'm then going to turn it over to Christy, the star of the show, who is going to walk through the wastewater management collection system alternatives, all of the cost of the alternatives, both sewer extension options and maintaining your existing septic systems. She will briefly, one slide, look at the discharge location for in-town wastewater treatment. I just mentioned as to why we didn't go further with that. And lastly, we'll close out with feasibility discussions and next steps. So a little history, the Brookfield has 17 miles of gravity sewers existing, 14 pump stations, and 7 miles of force main. All of it goes to the wastewater treatment plant in Danbury. The current scope was to evaluate alternatives, to expand the collection system, to collect sewers from the Candlewood Peninsula and the Candlewood Road area, which is this red clouded area down in here, is what the current study was intended to do. And important to note, as the chairman, Nelson Malwitz, had mentioned earlier, this study was funded by Connecticut DEP 55% grant. If DEP wasn't behind the study, they wouldn't have funded the 55% grant. So DEP is on board with the study going forward. I mentioned that the draft report is online and where you can pick up the SKUs for it. So a little history. The 1985 consent order required on-site wastewater disposal management program and determination if further action is required. I did call the Connecticut DEP and emailed them. I corresponded with them. I asked them if that order is still open. They said it is still open. It has not been closed out, but it clearly has been dormant for years. But that is whether or not, sewer concerns with Brookfield with the existing septic system dates all the way back to the 70s and 80s. More recently, in 2018, the town sanitarium, Brookfield Town Sanitarium, and the Brookfield Director of Health made recommendations for sewers on the peninsula, where they co-authored a letter. And I'm going to just read the letter. So again, this was from 2018. This is prior to the current studies starting. The Brookfield Health Department recommends Brookfield Water Pollution Control Authority take the necessary steps to provide sanitary sewers to the Candlewood Shores Peninsula, including the Candlewood Shores Tax District, Arrowhead Point, Hickory Hills, and Candlewood Orchards. The area has been highlighted in red as an area of concern on the WPCA's sewer map for several years now, and with good reason. The small average lot size, the age of most of the homes, the fact that the vast majority of the homes were built for seasonal use and are now occupied year-round, and the environmental sensitivity associated with managing the relatively large volume of sewage on the relatively densely populated peninsula surrounded by Candlewood Lake must be considered moving forward. Average lot size on the peninsula is less than 0.3 of an acre. Due to the relatively restrictive sized lots, repairing septic system often requires exceptions to technical standards of the Connecticut Public Health Code. In some of these repair instances, the final permit issued are required to state that the septics are undersized for the total number of bedrooms in the homes. Housing stock in the shores is generally between 40 and 70 years old, and homes still served by their original septic systems are likely near the end of their useful life, while many of the rest are on their second system. Most of the original septic systems were designed for seasonal use only, and today most of the homes are occupied throughout the year. This means that many of the original systems are undersized relative to use expectancy. So given those concerns is where this study came from. I think there was a lot of questions in the past of where did this even come from, why are we even considering sewering this area? All of this is building up to why these studies occurred. So additionally, there was lake water quality monitoring, and per the health director of the town, the presence of E. coli, which can only be found from humans, was found in the lake, which led to beach closings. So bacteria in the lake could come from animals such as geese, but when it's E. coli is the form of the bacteria, it can only come from humans. and they found that that was the reason why there was beach closings. So as a result of all this, there was a wastewater facilities plan that Nelson mentioned that was completed by CDM Smith. Basically, that was an overarching facilities plan. There wasn't a lot of comments from the public on that one previously. Basically, that report needed to be done in order for future studies to be eligible, future studies, design, and implementation if you move forward. In order for them to be eligible for Connecticut DEP funding, that's why you have to do a wastewater facilities plan. The report that did have a lot of comments on was the Candlewood Lake Wastewater Management Plan by Lombardo Associates, LAI, which was also completed in 2020. That study had concluded that there was a possible impact on the Candlewood Lake water quality and that there was a possible impact on the water supply, specifically the shores and Arrowhead drinking water that contained elevated levels of nitrate. I know that there has been some debate back and forth as to whether or not this, is as much as that report said. Our current study didn't advance it. One of the things that I have mentioned to the Brookfield WPCA is if you truly wanted to get to the bottom of what the overall impact is, you'd need more money and more study. There was a limited funding there. I don't think that's really what we want to do at this point in time, but it would be up to the Brookfield WPCA. But we're not here to go back and forth on the merits of that report. It wasn't our report. So as a result of that, the current study was undertaken to evaluate alternatives further. So that's where we are today. What we did do is we looked at from a needs standpoint, we looked at the septic system records. And what's pretty alarming is that there's only 58% of the property have any record at all. So 42% of the properties, there's no record. Further, age information is only available on 35% of the properties, and of that 35%, the average age is 25 years. One would wonder if the other 65% of the properties that there's no age information, if it's likely older than 25 years. Perhaps it's original. Typically, people have better records in the more recent, last 10, 20 years than they would if a septic system was originally installed back in the 50s and 60s and there's no record of it at all. So that was alarming to us that probably the majority of the septic systems in the area are far older than 25 years old. Many of the properties were constructed in the 50s and 60s, and we're assuming that many of them have their original systems. Subsurface conditions, this is one thing that we had done as part of the study. We did it in order to figure out whether or not we would sewer the area by gravity or by pressure sewers, how deep we could go. We wanted to see if there was rock or if there was groundwater. Turns out that we found shallow bedrock 2.5 to 20 feet below grade. We found shallow groundwater 4 to 20 feet below grade. So that impacted the cost of sewering the area and impacted our alternatives. You typically don't want to put in a deep gravity sewer when it's in rock and on a tight road. So that really steered us toward what we want recommending, or if you were to move forward, is likely more of a pressure sewer system, given the rock and the groundwater. But what's interesting here is the bedrock is at 2.5 to 20 feet below grade. A typical septic system, the bottom of the system is 3 feet below the ground. Connecticut regulations say that you should have 4-foot separation from the bottom of your septic system to the top of ledge. So for a septic system to meet that requirement, the rock on your property would need to be around 7 feet deep. Well, we found cases where the rock was 2.5 feet deep. I don't know what the rock is on the individual properties, but it leads me to wonder whether or not you have that proper distance for a fully functioning septic system to act properly. Additionally, the groundwater was found 4 feet deep. No surprise, we're right around a lake. Same thing, from the bottom of a septic field, 3 feet deep, you're supposed to maintain 18 inches below. That's why I have Christy, thank you. So the depth of groundwater would need to be 4.5 feet deep below where your ground surface is. And I think in many cases, I'm wondering if the groundwater is higher than that. So that one makes me wonder, for the septic systems in the area, how well they could be acting with that information. The last thing I wanted to talk about was the density of development. Connecticut Department of Public Health issued some circular memorandums, and they basically stated that there's concern for potential to adversely affect groundwater quality in density greater than 6 bedrooms per acre, particularly in environmental sensitive sites like wetlands, lakes, and watercourses. We're looking at the Candlewood Peninsula on the right-hand side of the graph here. The peninsula lot size on average, as noted in the sanitarian's letter, is 0.3 acres. The average home has 10 bedrooms. 3 bedrooms, sorry. The average home has 3 bedrooms for a total, if you did that out, it's about 10 bedrooms per acre. Almost double what Connecticut Department of Public Health considered potential for concern, given the density. All of these lots have houses on them. It is very, very dense. What happens? You use the toilet, take a shower, you wash your clothes, it goes into a tank. A lot of times in my history around lakes like this, old homes that were built, sometimes it doesn't even have a septic field. We have not seen any evidence of that here. Sometimes it's just a tank. I've seen it many times in the past around lakes, and then you have to constantly pump it out. But ideally, and hopefully, and from what we understand, you all have septic systems, but that water from your toilet, your shower, your washing machine, then goes into a septic system, and when you have that dense of an area, and you're around a lake like that, there's nowhere for it to go than down into the groundwater. When it goes into the groundwater, if it hasn't been treated properly, it will impact your drinking water source, it will impact the groundwater, and it will impact the lake. There's nowhere for it to go unless the septic system was functioning properly. I have no issue, none of us have any issue with septic systems. They're great on large lots, you know, with great soils, when you don't have rock, high groundwater, but this particular area does seem alarming for whether the septic systems are functioning properly. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Christy to get into the details.
Thank you, Joe. I will echo the welcome. Thanks everyone for being interested and for being here with us this evening. I'm going to talk through the wastewater management alternatives that we reviewed for this study, which includes 5 different configurations for sanitary sewer extensions and some information on what it would take to have a septic system maintenance program to properly maintain and improve septic systems over time. So under the sanitary sewer options, there's a handful of configurations we looked at. The septic tank, effluent pumping or gravity, the step stag systems that Joe mentioned, have essentially been ruled out. I'll mention them again quickly because I know there was some history and people interested in that option, or interested in not having that option, I should say. Traditional gravity sewer system, which is basically every home is connected to the sewer with a gravity connection. Maybe a limited number of grinder pumps for some low-lying properties, but the sewers generally flow downhill by gravity. And then at flow points would require public WPCA pumping stations. Another option, a full low-pressure sewer system where basically every property has a pump and the system is pressurized and wastewater is conveyed out of the subject area by pressure. And we also looked at hybrid systems, which are areas of gravity and low pressure, just basically different topography in different areas lends itself to a couple different solutions. So we tried to look at kind of the gamut of how sewers could be extended to this project area if a project were to move forward. And then again, under the septic system maintenance program, this would include maintaining septic systems with a program of inspections and improvements as needed. So again, I'll just briefly mention the step stag system. This is the option that was out there a few years ago to potentially keep your septic tanks, have solids go to the septic tanks, just have liquid clarified and being pumped out of the project area. It's a challenge in for a lot of reasons, mostly including the age of these septic tanks. You can only do that if the septic tanks are watertight, and they would probably largely need to be replaced. And it also does maintain a responsibility on the property owner to keep maintaining the, pumping out the septic tanks even after the sewers are in. So this option has been ruled out. It's no longer being considered. Again, a traditional gravity sewer with gravity connections or a limited number of private grinder pumps. All septic tanks would go away. Every home would get a connection to a gravity sewer. On some low-lying properties, there might be a pump to pump it up to a sewer that's at a higher elevation. Some pros here. This is the most common type of system. Low energy requirement. Gravity obviously works during power outages no matter what. In general, systems like this have the least amount of long-term maintenance. They can handle seasonal flow fluctuations, which is important here. It's simple to expand to adjacent areas if that were if that were ever necessary. And generally, operations staff are familiar with this type of infrastructure. The cons, and it is apparent here in some areas of the peninsula, topography can result in very deep sewers. So if basically the sewers need to keep flowing downhill until they get to a point where they get pumped up again. And sometimes if you have a hilly spot or, topography that's kind of working against the direction you want to convey the flow, you can end up with some very deep sewers, which is very costly construction. And again, as Joe mentioned, there are some areas where we had groundwater as shallow as 4 feet below grade, rock as shallow as 2.5 feet below grade. Certainly not everywhere, but those areas did exist, and those would be constructability concerns. With the gravity sewer system, you would need to site some pump stations in relative low points throughout the project area, so there would be construction of new pump stations in neighborhoods. And there's also, over time, potential for infiltration. Gravity sewers do last a long time, generally 100 years plus, but they do tend to crack and leak a little bit over time, so there's potential for some extraneous flow in the long term. Low pressure system, every septic tank would be replaced with a grinder pump, and the system is pressurized. So your septic tank goes away, you get a different, smaller tank with just a pump in it, pumps usually a few times a day out into a pressurized main in the street. The pros, it is typically less expensive initially, less expensive capital construction because the pipes are pretty small and they're at shallower depth, usually 4 or 5 feet below grade. So a lot of those issues with rock and water you don't have to deal with a grinder pump system. Piping has fused joints, very long lifespan, generally watertight, more watertight even than a gravity sewer. It does lend itself to easily serve areas with very undulating topography or even very flat topography, where a gravity sewer would get deeper and deeper and deeper if you were to construct it. With a low pressure system, it can kind of just stay with the road. So in general, this is shorter construction duration, less disruption, minimal need for pump stations. But the con, obviously there is a con with a system like this. Everybody would get a pump. You have a new piece of mechanical equipment on your property. Higher energy usage, therefore, also compared to a gravity system. And it does require maintenance of the pump on a regular basis. It should be routinely checked, and at some point, every homeowner would need to replace their pump. It's also a little more sensitive to wastewater flow fluctuations. Kind of wastewater sitting there in a tank for a while. It's not the best situation. And prolonged power outages do result in loss of service unless there was a generator at that individual property. So there are definitely cons to a low pressure system. But again, overall, typically the lowest capital cost. Hybrid systems, basically some areas of gravity, some areas of low pressure. We'll look at that a little bit in a little while. But you capitalize on the pros of gravity systems where it makes sense, and capitalize on the low pressure system where gravity is more expensive and not as feasible. The septic system, maintenance, upgrade, replacement option. Basically everybody would continue to use their existing septic system. So, not that different than what you have now. Given the history and the concerns with density development and age of systems, we would recommend at this point a systematic program of inspections and improvements where warranted. That would probably be outside of the WPCA purview, either by the health department, homeowner associations, some other entity. But this would ensure that septic systems are maintained properly and functioning as well as they can on an individual property. And I say that as well as they can because, as Joe noted, some of the properties that might have shallow bedrock or shallow water or just areas that are very densely developed do have limitations in terms of how well septics can function. But in general, obviously pros to this, there's no capital construction project here. There's no talk of where do we send the flow, no talk of appropriating money and how are we going to pay for it. There's no initial project. No disruption, no new construction traffic. Any system that is compliant, relatively new, in good working order, probably get an inspection and be just fine and not have to change your current process. No new sewer user fees on residents, though there is a cost for pumping, which everybody has now, and there would also be some kind of a cost for the inspection program as well. And again, no change in practice for homeowners other than a periodic inspection. Cons, similar potential for failure as the current systems based on existing ground conditions and system age. Anywhere that the conditions on a property warrant an engineered or an elevated or a mounded system, those definitely have higher replacement costs, including, not just higher capital construction costs if you needed to mound a system or have some kind of a specialty proprietary system, but also engineering costs and things like that that go into an engineered septic system. Areas with limited lot size, wetlands, flood hazards, shallow groundwater, those reliant on wells would remain areas of environmental concern. Basically, we're going to try to make everything work as well as possible, but this is keeping the wastewater management on site as it is now. There are certainly potential implementation challenges with a systematic program, inspections and improvements, varying lot sizes, varying ages. You might get a result that's very different from your neighbor. Some people are going to be really happy, and some people might be really upset, not realizing that they had a system that wasn't quite operating the way that it was supposed to be. And then life cycle costs would maintain the responsibility of the property owner. So, again, that's as it is right now. But if the inspection program does trigger an earlier septic replacement than you might have otherwise thought, those costs are on you, and there is no participation by the town or grant funding or payment plan that's sponsored by the town to help spread those costs out. So I'm going to try to go through the multiple alternatives that we looked at here. The peninsula and surrounding areas, I'll say again, I think Joe already said there's about 1,100 parcels here, about 800 on the peninsula, 70 or 72 or so up in Candlewood Lake Club, 4650 or so in northern Candlewood Lake Road, and then about 183 down here in southern Candlewood Lake Road and Pleasant Rise. These study area boundaries, I should say, were taken from prior reports. If a project were implemented, we would look very carefully at the edges and exactly who should be in and who should be out. But at this point, for big round study picture and numbers, we kept the boundaries basically the way that they were in prior reports. The good news here that the existing collection system is represented by all these blue dots. These are all manholes. You see way down here, down the southern end of Candlewood Lake Road by the school, it's actually not that far from the southern end of this study area. So most likely, if sewers were to be built here, they would just be conveyed fairly simply down Candlewood Lake Road and connect to that location and be conveyed to Danbury, as Joe mentioned. So these 6 alternatives that we identified, we basically got 5 sewering options ranging from all gravity, very deep, to all low pressure, very shallow, and a few options in between. And then we'll get into the septic system option again a little bit and see what that would look like. Alternative A, gravity sewers, just a handful of grinder pumps and 7 WPCA pump stations. In total, it's about 78,000 feet of gravity sewer, up to about 35 feet deep. About 30 private grinder pumps, so there are still some grinder pumps in this option. The parcels that are green here around some of the edges, and also these orange ones are basically properties that are just so far below the road that if they were to all be served with gravity, they would make the gravity sewers so deep that they just weren't constructible. I'll be honest, in this certain scenario, up to 35 feet deep, we're right at the edge of whether it's constructible or not. This is meant to show the extreme, how it could look with a minimal number of gravity pumps. 7 pump stations, we've cited them preliminarily on land that is either owned by the community associations or by the town, not on individual home properties at this point in time. But a project like this is probably in the range of $90 to $95 million to construct it this way. And again, there are definitely constructability concerns when you get to sewers that are that deep. Alternative B, we changed things a little bit here, up to about 200 grinder pumps. I think I had the wrong figure on there. Shoot, there should be more. Oh no, what did I do? Okay, alternative B, would have grinder pumps here, and that is too bad, and in here. So we're up to about 200 private grinder pumps in this option. What that does, by adding more grinder pumps, we've made the sewer a little bit shallower, so the deepest sewer there in option B is up to about 25 feet deep. Still the 7 pump stations, and still a pretty costly project in the $85 to $90 million range. Alternative C, we're getting into what we call the hybrid options, where there are bigger areas of grinder pumps and fewer pump stations. So in this option, we've down to about 55,000 feet of gravity sewer, up to about 25 feet deep. So that same maximum depth, but in this option, almost all the sewer is less than 15 feet deep. So this is a much more reasonable, kind of a typical construction configuration for a gravity sewer project. This option, we're up to about 370 private grinder pumps. But we've lost a couple of pump stations here. So now we have more individual grinder pumps, but we're down to 5 pump stations total. So that is now 3 on the peninsula, 1 at North Mountain Road, 1 on Candlewood Lake Road, and, yep, that's it, 3 and 2. So 5 pump stations. And this project, so the construction cost does come down when you start to add more grinder pumps and make the sewer shallower. So a project like this is in the range of about $65 to $70 million. Alternative D, you see more color coming in here. Larger areas of low pressure sewer and grinder pumps. We're up to about 550 grinder pumps, only 3 public pump stations, just 1 on the peninsula. 1 on the peninsula, 1 at North Mountain Road, and 1 on Candlewood Lake Road. So again, with more grinder pumps, slightly shallower sewer. In this case, we're down to about 10 feet as the maximum, and the project cost is $60 to $65 million. Finally, alternative E, this is the scenario where everybody gets a pump. It's simple in a way because everybody gets the same thing, and the whole system is pretty easy to construct, relatively speaking. You don't have a lot of challenges with groundwater. You don't have a lot of challenges with rock. But you do have 1,100 private grinder pumps. Probably still 1 pump station on the peninsula because the grinder pumps individually aren't really intended to pump all the way from here through all this whole area down here, so we need a little bit of pressure boosting on the peninsula. So there would still be 1 pump station on the peninsula. And the project cost is in the range of $55 to $60 million for a project like this. So we'll talk a little bit again about the septic maintenance, upgrade, replacement option again. As Joe mentioned, there are aging septic systems throughout the project area. Continued concern with density, specifically on the peninsula. The other areas along Candlewood Lake Road, the density of development is not quite the same. As Joe mentioned, Board of Health data on only about 58% of the properties, and age information only on about 35% of the properties. Of the properties that have age information, about 60% are over 20 years old, 30% are actually over 30 years old, and 13% are over 40 years old, based on the information that are at the public health department. And again, there's no age information on the other 65% of properties. So properties were constructed in the 50s and 60s in much of this project area. Some do still have their original systems. If they're still there, it's hard to say how well they could possibly be functioning at this point in time. And if there was an inspection program, they would be likely to require replacement in the near future. And again, some are confirmed and documented to not be code compliant, or they have inadequate records. So if the option to maintain septics is pursued, we do believe that a septic inspection program should be implemented, a systematic program, again, either by the health department, by the homeowners associations, some entity that would actually organize and confirm that properties are inspected. There are still concerns with the lot size, the density of development. Again, that 10 bedrooms per acre on the peninsula is above, I think, what would be allowed to be built today. And it's a threshold of concern for Connecticut Department of Public Health. So even if your individual septic system is working just fine, having septic after septic after septic on small lots in an environmentally sensitive area is not an ideal situation. But nonetheless, this option could be pursued, and it's possible to make every lot, as good as it can be. But I'll again mention that engineered systems, elevated septics do increase replacement costs. So, some of the low end, I replaced my septic system for, quote, only $15,000 or only $20,000. Those are certainly possible a lot of places, but I think on the peninsula and in some of these other areas, the costs could be much, much higher than that. Okay, there's a lot of words on this slide. I'm well aware of that. I'm going to read through a little bit of this because the next slide has the cost comparison for all these options, which I know is what everybody is most interested in. The point here, and Joe mentioned this too, is that we tried to include everything that we could reasonably anticipate as part of a project cost. So we broke it into two pieces. There's the initial project capital cost, which includes basically our estimate of construction costs. So sewer infrastructure construction, pipes and manholes in the road, stubs to the property line, purchase of grinder pumps. So construction cost, a construction project would include labor, equipment, materials, contractor conditions, insurance, overhead and profit, and some construction estimating contingency given that we're not very far into a design at this point. For the capital costs, we included escalation to the end of 2026, figuring it would be at least a few years before anything here could be built, as well as engineering and implementation costs are in there, and then an additional project contingency saying, like, we never know exactly what's going to be in a project like this early on in the planning stages. Separately, we did a 50-year life cycle cost, and this part is important, and I think that people should understand that we tried to evaluate what it would really cost homeowners over 50 years. We contemplated doing it over 100 years because honestly, sewer infrastructure does really last 100 years or so, but we ended up with 50 because nobody really likes to think that far ahead. You're not going to own the house anymore in 100 years. So the life cycle costs include those capital costs outlined above, also assuming a 20% Clean Water Fund grant, and we'll talk about that again in a little bit because there's a chance for more grant there. So what we did was we figured out what it would cost to upgrade and maintain some of the equipment that needs to be maintained over the course of 50 years. So gravity sewers, again, definitely more than 50 years. You wouldn't expect any substantial replacement or renewal of infrastructure within 50 years. So we didn't add any additional cost to the gravity sewers themselves in the first 50 years. Honestly, we could have credited a salvage value there because after 50 years, the sewer pipes are still going to be in the ground and they probably won't need much work for quite a while after that. But to be kind of conservative there, we just assumed that 50 years is the end point of their life. Pump station equipment replacement about every 20 years, grinder pump replacement about every 15 years. That's typical industry standard for when we should be contemplating or expecting to have to replace some major equipment. Assumed a septic life of 30 to 40 years, that's about 3% replacements per year, $35,000 per replacement. Again, I know that sometimes you might be able to replace them less than that. Sometimes it's more than that as well. So this was intended to be an overall average. For the septic option, $400 every 3 years for tank pumping, $600 every 5 years for an inspection program. The inspection program's not developed yet. It could be $800, it could be $300. We don't exactly know what that would entail, but we carried a reasonable estimate for that program as well. For all the sewer options, we included the sewer user bill that we know people would have to pay if they were to connect, and an average of $10,000 per property to connect to the system. So that's important because in the initial project capital cost, it just includes stubs to the property line. But in the life cycle cost, we did acknowledge that every homeowner at some point in the few years beyond the capital construction project is going to have to connect to the system. So that cost is factored into the long-term life cycle. Also include utility power costs for both the pump stations as well as the grinder pumps at 25 cents per kilowatt hour. And we also included about 4% annual escalation and then brought everything back to current dollars with the EPA discount rate of 2.5%, which is a present value discount rate to bring everything to current dollars. So this is where we ended up. This first column here lists our alternatives, A through E for the sewers, and then F is the septic system option. Second column, the initial project capital costs. Those are those cost ranges that I presented on the prior slides. Again, noting that there's no capital cost by the WPCA for the septic system option. The next column assumes about a 20% grant on the initial project capital cost. So this range, take about 20% off. I ended up switching from a range to an individual number there because at some point you have to do that. And then 50-year estimated life cycle costs. So this is including the capital costs and all of those long-term maintenance costs that have to be factored in over the life of a project. So you'll see here, in the end, our estimates for the sewer projects range from $120 to $130 million over 50 years for the sewer project, and about $110 million for the option to maintain septics. On the surface here, the septic option looks like it's probably the least expensive. It probably is, but the sewer projects they're within about 20% of each other, so it's not a slam dunk one way or another. It's not clear that one option is way more expensive than the others in the long term. What this works out to be for every property is basically between $2,000 and $2,400 per year. If you were to just take these total numbers, divide them by 50 years and the 1,100 properties in the study area, these are the numbers that you would get. So basically, the most expensive sewer project, if it were financed evenly, would cost everybody about $2,400 a year. And the septic option, if everybody were to maintain and inspect and replace their septic system, it would cost about $2,000 a year. Couple things I want to note here is that I said they're all within about 20% of each other. Any additional grants, so these numbers assume that 20% Clean Water Fund grant, which is standard, basic. This project definitely qualifies for that. There are other towns, Joe mentioned Old Lyme. There are ways to get, just politically, band together and try to get more grant funding for projects through various sources. Any additional grant money beyond the 20% is going to lower these costs and lower these costs. It would most likely not lower the septic costs because those are individual property owners that are responsible for that, not a town that can go and get grants. So that would probably bring these numbers a little bit closer to this septic option number. And the other thing that I will note is that maintaining septic systems, again, it might be the least costly. The cost won't be spread evenly over time. When you have to replace your septic system, you have to figure out on your own how to do that basically now. Do you get a home equity loan? Do you take the money out of savings? Where does that money come from? Whereas with a sewer project, all the costs get financed. You have you're presented with a payment schedule up front, and even the individual connections can be financed through the WPCA through the project. So it's a little bit easier maybe on the budget standpoint to budget for a sewer project compared to a septic project. Okay, so I know that was a lot. I'm going to spend just a quick minute on the discharge locations in-town wastewater treatment evaluation. Joe mentioned before that we know that everybody knows that the capacity at Danbury that is currently allocated to Brookfield is not enough to support a project like this. We looked at all the potential connections in Brookfield, which would include this project, Dean Pocono Road project, other properties that are currently in the assessment area, sewer assessment area, but are not yet connected. Brookfield could end up with flows up to about 900,000 gallons per day or so. You could say 1 million gallons per day for round number planning. The current agreement with Danbury is only for about 380,000. There's a pending agreement with Danbury for 580,000. That is, my understanding is that it's close to being finalized at this point in time. There is potential in the future to have additional negotiations with Danbury. And I think, as Joe said, those negotiations beyond the 580 have not proceeded because we don't expect at this point that this project would proceed in the near future, but that would be the route that would make the most sense to pursue, to try to get more capacity from Danbury. Yes, there would be fees associated with that, but they're much less than some of the other options. We did look at an option to reroute some of the flow, potentially just the flow from this Candlewood area up to New Milford, just by pumping it in that direction instead. Rerouting to New Milford would probably be in the range of $10 to $12 million, plus whatever fees New Milford would charge. It's also unclear right now if New Milford has actually enough capacity to really take a project of this size. They seem to have some, but we have not had detailed conversations with them at all about whether they could accept this much, because that's a large fee compared to what we expect that it would be to send the flow to Danbury. The potential to build a new treatment facility in Brookfield, we looked at it. It is probably a $30 to $40 million project. Not realistic, not the recommendation at this point in time. I think you would have to really exhaust the Danbury option and exhaust the New Milford option, and really want to do this project before any further investigation onto a treatment facility in Brookfield is considered. So that is not something that we are currently pursuing. So feasibility discussions, next steps. There are definitely challenges to implementation, including the treatment capacity, affordability. I'm going to turn this over again to Joe to talk through that a little bit more. Good.
Thank you, Christy. 2 slides left, just bear with us. We went a little long, but it's on me. I know I went long, she did not, blame me. So, affordability discussions, we talked about treatment capacity and affordability already, so I'm not going to go through that again. But the grand list value for the Candlewood study area is $420 million. Historically, the Brookfield WPCA has done benefit assessment based on up to 10% of the value would fund the sewer extension project. That would yield about $42 million after 20% grant. The cost that we projected was a little higher than $42 million, but it's in the realm of that. With the grant, it was closer to, I think, 45 to 50 million. Additional grants would be needed, which is what we mentioned. I would say that now is a better time than ever. If there's grant money, there's bill money, there's federal money. The next 3 years would be the time to capitalize on grant if you had any consideration at all to move forward with the project. The grant money that is out there right now likely won't be out there 3-5 years from now. This would be the time. We have a lot of municipalities that we work with across the state that are taking advantage of the higher grant percentage that's coming in at this time. The disparity of those home values, as I mentioned, it was a wide range, from down close to 100,000 to over 3 million. In the past, when the Brookfield WPCA did this assessment up to 10%, a lot of the home values were close in value, much closer, and it made sense to do it that way. Given this large disparity, I think that they would need to look at a different way in order to fund the project through the assessment process. We provided ideas on how that could be, but I think that would have to be finalized if the project actually moved forward, is to determine how best it would be to do that. And one final note is benefit assessment. The percentage of the property value per the Clean Water Fund for DEEP regulations is the value that you charge someone for the benefit cannot be more than the value that can be assumed that the property went up. So clearly, if you had 10% of $3 million, that'd be $300,000. If you put a $3 million home, gave them sewer, their property is not going to go up $300,000. So the Clean Water Fund, their regulations actually wouldn't allow you to do it that way. Last slide, we're planning on following up with a survey forthcoming. We went through all this, like I said, we did the whole study. We'd like to seek your opinion. The survey will have questions like if you know how old your septic system is. We'd love to have more data on that to try to finalize the report. Right now it's just a draft report. It'll have, if you want to provide any information on the condition of your septic system. We'll also ask you if you're interested in the project or not. I know there's a lot of people that are against the project. I know at the last public meeting, there was a few people that came up to me after the meeting that said they were for the project. They didn't come up and speak during the time. So we would like to do this survey to try to just gauge the general interest of what is the public, are you interested in the project or not? We encourage your participation. We would then take that into the draft report as well as any comments you have in the report, and we would finalize the report, including summarizing the results from that. I already mentioned that the survey is available online. We hope that you see some value in the study that we did, all the information that we presented. This is the report. That's what it'll get you. We have design drawings for every single one of the alternatives that Christy laid out. Again, this report can sit on the shelf for even 10 years. 10 years from now, someone can pick that up and you still have plan and profile drawings that have value that someone could start from. And all the information we collected, the survey, the borings, information on your drinking water supply. I hope you use that to understand that you do have some concern there, and maybe you can address it however you want to address it. We think that there was value from this study, no matter whether the project moves forward or not. So at this point, it's time for us to stop talking and for us to start listening. So.
Okay, many of you are familiar with Greg Donowski. He's been a fixture in town for some time, but I have asked him, he's been asked to go ahead and receive public comment, and he's got some ground rules for that. So go ahead, Greg. Thank you.
Okay, we're live. Good evening, everyone. Okay, so it's time to hear from you. So you're welcome to come to the podium. We'll start a line here. I'll flip the podium around. You can direct your questions to the folks up at the table. They will go ahead and answer your questions at the end of this evening. We only have this room till 9 o'clock tonight, so we're going to stop taking questions at 8:45. That gives us about 45 minutes, but you can certainly send questions to the WPCA anytime after this evening. If a question's already been asked, just so we can keep things moving, don't ask the same question again, so everyone gets a chance to talk. I do have a timer up here, and we will limit your comments to 2 minutes. So with that, I'm going to flip the podium. You're welcome to come up and start asking questions and making comments. And if you would, state your name and address for the record.
Capture the people instead of just the screen?
Hi.
I know.
Jacqueline Block, 3 Bayview Drive. How can you ask residents whether or not they want sewers when you know you don't have the capacity to waste flow from them? 2, the engineer said a new sewage plant wouldn't be needed. Why don't you include the cost of a new plant in the cost estimate for sewers? And 3, why don't you build, why don't you build the sewage treatment plant first, then ask residents if they want sewers?
John Bevelacqua, same address. The engineer's report said a plant would cost about $40 million plus. Have you obtained any independent quotes? If so, what are they? Have you looked at the cost of other sewage treatment plants? Danbury had to spend over $100 million just to upgrade their plant to the new environmental laws. Why do you think a whole new plant can be built for 60% less?
My name is Norman Edelson. My home is at 116 North Lakeshore Drive. I volunteer as the treasurer of the Kindle Shores Tax District. Okay, thank you. The WPA signed off on the C.D. Smith report in September of 2022 and October of 2023, which excluded paving our roads curb to curb after the sewer lines are put in. I could be wrong, but please share with us the page number and the most current C.D. Smith report that clearly states our roads will be paved after the sewers are put in. We demand that our roads be left as the WPCA found them. The Shores do not have the money to pay for the paving, after your trench is dug and covered. Our residents will have to be assessed over $4 million for this work. I recently got estimates for $5 to $6 million divided by 500 homes. I have 4 questions. Do you think it is fair that our neighbors will be assessed the $5 to $6 million to repave our roads? To put the sewers in? Please explain why you omitted this expense again, that is paving the roads, after being alerted to your report of September 2022 of its omission. The action of yours strongly suggests to our residents that the WPCA has no intention of paving our roads. Therefore, our residents should expect to pay this additional financial burden to pave our roads. Is this correct? Why should the Shores accept any other calculations in C.D. Smith's report for accuracy and inclusiveness based on this repeated major omission? It appears that the WPCA's single-mindedness in this project is causing anxiety and fear for our neighbors. Does the fear and anxiety enter into your calculations? Are you going to answer these questions now, or we will not receive any specific answers like before? Thank you.
Bruce Alec, no, start the time when I start to talk. Bruce Alexander, 36 North Lake Shore Drive, Brookfield. And I might note before the clock starts that I have tailored my comment to 2 minutes. This is a comment which I was invited by your invitation to do a comment versus a question. And you'll have to allow for my occasional joke clearing, because I have a problem with that, and my reading of my paper, because I have essential tremor. You may start the clock. Because I have time, this to less than 2 minutes. The following are some excerpts from a letter to the editor which I sent to the Danbury News Times. In conducting your feasibility study, you are putting the cart before the horse. What about an advisability study? How about a necessity study? Or a practicality study? You claim this project is to protect Kentwood Lake from pollution, but no less reputable agencies than the DEEP, the EPA, and the Kentwood Lake Authority have declared the lake as clean. Did you not watch the videos produced by our community's sewer committee revealing new data collection from potential experts? They show that septics do not, sorry for the shaking. Septics do not contribute but a trace percentage of phosphorus or nitrates to the lake or drinking water. How can you ignore that? It must be noted that despite the multitude of lake communities around the lake, 4 towns have not considered septics. The WPCA sewer project on Candle Peninsula is self-serving, designed to garnish income from existing homeowners, promote more construction of multi-housing units, and thus increase your bottom line. Remember, the fancy name WPCA, the Water Pollution Control Authority, is in fact a sewer management entity, not making income from sewers. Kindly consider this and cease proceeding any further projects.
James Miner, Candlewood Shores. Danbury spent over $100 million just to upgrade their plant a couple of years ago. So why do you think you could purchase the land and build a whole new plant for $40 million plus? In the future, the cost of the new plant is going to be close to 100 million plus. Where are you going to get the money? No matter what you say, unless WPCA has a magic money wand, you're going to need some contributions from the town. And that means that our town's taxes will have to go up to pay for the plant. We just had a tax increase and no one wants to pay more taxes for a sewage treatment plant. Your sewer and plant estimate don't include interest during the construction period, which could be years. How are you planning to finance construction? If the WPCA's estimates wind up being too low, who pays the excess costs? If the WPCA has no risk that the estimates are too low, why should we rely on you? We understand that you have a moratorium on new sewer hookups because you have a serious capacity problem. And we understand that a number of developers are putting pressure on you to do something. A sewage treatment plant would solve your capacity problems and allow unrestricted development, not only in the Four Corners area, but also around the lake, and would allow condos and multifamily units to be built around the lake, just like Poets Landing, Danbury. We do not think that this is the best interest of the residents or the lake. Sewers means unlimited development, and that would change drastically the nature and feel of our communities and would be extremely damaging to the lake. Lastly, even if someone has to replace their septic system at 25 to 30,000, 35, maybe give you that, that is still less than the tax assessment for the sewers by the WPCA. And a septic system requires no electricity, no backup generator, and no grinder pumps, and very little annual maintenance. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Marty Foncello. I live at 11 Drover Road, and for the record, I'm not in the area impacted by this, but I am the state representative for Brookfield. My job is to listen to the concerns of all the people of Brookfield, to be a voice for the people, and to try to help them resolve problems. So in the year or so I've been in this job, and a long time ago I used to be the first selectman, but in this state representative job, a summary of some of the concerns, questions, comments of the people I've talked to about this are as follows. They don't feel they need it, they don't really want it, they can't afford it, and why come to us to finance it? They don't feel that the shores are polluting the lake. They haven't seen any evidence of that from DEEP or anyone else. They ask why they're the only ones on the lake being forced to pay to keep the water clean, essentially. A couple of questions here, just to be brief. Again, obviously you're not going to answer them now. Based on the topography of the area, and it's extreme, how much of the area is gravity versus pump? Would be covered by either one or the other. What happens if there's a power outage? What are the lowest and highest elevations in the area? Do the residents get to vote on this, or is it going to be mandated to them? And another question, fairly recently, would sewer options cap the development in Brookfield? The list of options that you presented earlier. Residents will have other questions for you, I'm sure. I haven't hit on everyone. You've probably heard of most of them already. I ask that you please keep me on your distribution so that I know what's being presented to the people in town here. Thanks very much.
My name is Ben Spegelevin from Candlewood Shores, and I would like to forfeit my speaking time to Deirdre Corey.
Deirdre Corey, 57 Skyline. I do not trust WPCA's estimates tonight. They previously assured me of their 10% of assessed property value rule of thumb maximum cap for assessments. Now CDM Smith has said it might be 12% of my assessed value. Even this 12% cap doesn't seem right, since they've omitted the glaring expense of building a new treatment plant that will absolutely be required for this project. Tonight, they've also said that the approximate annual cost, where they did their cost comparison, assumed that the total project would be financed evenly. But also tonight, they said they'll have to look at that typical equal kind of calculation spread across people equally, because the benefit can't exceed the value that goes to the house, meaning the $3 million house on the lake can't have a $300,000 septic. Well, if one house pays less of this total cost, I'm likely gonna have to pay more, because the money's gotta come from somewhere. Under Connecticut law, benefiting homeowners will be required to pay any and all additional sewer project costs at any time into the future. So tonight's cost estimates are simply moving targets, or a smoke screen, so to speak. Quick math applied to my house with an assessed value of $291,550. The unlikely 12% cap is $35,000 for me. The much more likely scenario of 16 to 18% cap puts my assessment somewhere between $46,000 and $50,000. Don't forget, I'll also pay 4% interest on your assessment, plus ongoing sewer connection, etc. costs. Let's be candid tonight. If any portion of a sewer assessment is unpaid, it is foreclosable, just like unpaid real property taxes can be foreclosed by the tax collector. If unpaid for more than a month, the sewer assessment legally becomes a lien on my house. Any unpaid sewer assessment charges rack at 18% a year, just like unpaid real property taxes do. I repeat, the WPCA has legal authority to foreclose unpaid sewer assessment liens. See this poster with these Connecticut laws quoted. On January 31, 2023, Mr. Mowitz wrote a public comment to raise Senate Bill number 916 concerning unpaid sewer assessment fees and charges, in which he states, in a discussion with leaders in the wastewater industry in Connecticut, it is merely the threat of foreclosure that prompts settlement from delinquent owner. So yes, foreclosure threat for unpaid sewer assessments is real if this project moves forward. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Gail Miner. I live at 18 South Lakeshore Drive. I want to take you back until the early months of 2016. I live in Candlewood Shores, and our president at the time did his own study on how to patch or put gravel and tar on our roads or repave our roads. He talked to a lot of town officials, he talked to a lot of companies, paving companies, and it came up several times during his discussions that you should not pave the roads in the Candlewood Shores community, because there's this company called the WPCA, and they are targeting you in the shores and surrounding communities because you are so highly densely populated. It would give them 1,100 new customers right away. And when they bring in sewers, which is probably going to be mandated, you're going to have to pave your own roads. So don't pave them now in 2016. Because probably within 10 years, you're going to have to repave them again at your own cost. And the president at the time told me this, and I said, well, I've never even heard of the WPCA. And this can't be happening, can't be true. Not in the United States, not in this free country. It sounds communist to me to be mandated to have sewers, pay for them, and then have a bill and have to pay for them. It can't be happening. Sure enough, 7.5 years later, here we are. Still have a problem where all the sewage is going to go to. There's tons of development going on in Brookfield, and yet you still want to put sewers in the shores. when there's no place for the sewage to go? Again, here comes up that topic, the treatment plant. Well, we all know that if Danbury fixed theirs for $100 million, a new one's got to be at least $200 million. Where is that money going to come from? Please stop this sewer nonsense.
Hi, Debbie Cully, Kenwood Shores. When you survey residents, you should be clear that if estimates are wrong or too low, homeowners will still be required to pay all costs, no matter how much over the estimates. That's it.
Ray Yaman, 2 Laurel Drive.
There's 2 main points I want to make. One is that if the lake didn't exist and these septic systems were looked at on their own, you wouldn't be proposing sewering the area. You would just be demanding that people upgrade their septic systems. And that's sort of inherently fair in the sense that if you've got a brand new system you've paid for, you're not responsible for any problem. And if you have a 60-year-old system, you don't. The component here that pushes this over into sewering the whole area is, of course, the lake. But the lake is a community resource. It isn't a resource solely enjoyed by these 1,100 homeowners. You've got a town beach, you've got ramps, people come all over the town, use the lake. Realtors advertise the lake as a gem in the community. Everybody knows it's used by people out of state. So when you have a massive projected cost like this for a community resource, you wouldn't normally be just having these 1,100 homeowners bear that cost. It'd be like, the community doesn't require just the people around the Still River Greenway to take care of that, or Harrybrook Park, or Cower Park in Bethel, or anything like that. And I don't think it should be the case here. Another point that needs to be made is that people who, those 1,100 homeowners already pay for the privilege of living. They pay for higher housing prices, they're paying it in their mortgage every month. It's not like it's a free ride. We're paying much higher taxes. I know 2 years ago my taxes went up 15% in 1 year, and so did my neighbors. When I called the tax assessor, I said, how did that happen? I know there's revaluation, but what, did the whole town go up 15%? She said, no, basically most homes went up 4%. So, and I've, by the way, I'm a real estate attorney, so it's not like I don't run into this stuff every day. And the same thing happened in Kenwood Island, New Fairfield. The towns disproportionately whack the lake property. So we're already paying for the privilege of living there. And for those who live in the modest homes especially, putting a gigantic assessment on these homes is absolutely an existential threat to someone. There's no doubt in my mind. I've seen just in Bethel, just for a water line assessment in the Stony Hill area, some of them are $46,000. And overhead in a home is overhead. It doesn't matter if it's taxes or common charges, anything like that. I'll give you an example of condominiums used. Casagmo and Ridgefield, they deferred their maintenance for 30 years. That's turned out to be crushing their value. Thank you.
Hi, Bob Cooper, Arrowhead. Point out actually a very simple question, which is who or what committee is the final decider as it relates to this project progressing? Thank you.
Joan Polson, 16 Twilight Lane. I just want to make 2 points. One is that I was under the impression that the lake was not polluted, and living in Candlewood Shores, being a tax district and having our own beach, that we check the water regularly, and I think we'd all be aware if we had a pollution problem. And the other point I'd like to make is that many of us in Candlewood Shores have been there a long time. Many of us are senior citizens on fixed income, and I think it would be, I know personally for myself and for other people in similar situations, this would be a really major hardship and possibly cause people to even have to lose their homes. So I just want to make that point. Thank you.
Michael Solden, 29 Clearview Drive. I was speaking to a very high-level military engineer, and he's familiar with Candlewood Shores. And he said, if you do any kind of blasting in there to do a sewer system, it's very possible that the foundations of some of the houses will be cracked. I had never thought of that. If such a thing were to happen, who would be responsible for that damage?
Good evening, Bob Forsberg, Arrowhead Point, and really my question is really around the survey, and we've already heard a lot of comments around cost of paving roads, overhead costs, or overrun costs, who actually picks those up. So I guess my request is just a level of transparency in terms of the survey that does go out. And I think it's worth mentioning to the survey recipients that all of these sorts of costs get absorbed by someone, and those someones are generally the people that are here in town or in the particular areas. So really the request is just a level of transparency, and I was not here a year ago, but I continuously hear, whether in private conversations or here in the auditorium tonight, it just doesn't sound that the level of transparency is there, that people feel as if they're being sort of jammed into a particular option and so forth. So that's really the request, and hopefully you guys can carry that out. Thank you.
Hi, John Lepler, Candlewood Shores. First of all, actually, the engineers, I think you did a great job in your presentation. Very thorough. I know it's not going to be everything everyone wants to hear, but for what they were asked to do, I think they did a good job. Second, I'm going to answer a question for you. There won't be any blasting. We'll be hammering and line drilling. There is a lot of rock, so yeah, the number might be a lot higher than you guys assumed because I built a house there and it was in the ground. It's going to be very costly. Third, when a year ago we all came here, we were discussing Kennewood Lake and the pollution. And they gave maps and showing the red areas, and it's not coming from the river. And I asked a question, and I said, if we're concerned about phosphorus levels in the lake, why aren't we talking about stormwater? Your response to me was we were not asked to look at stormwater. We're only supposed to be looking at sewer. That's what we're being paid for. Have you made that recommendation that they look at stormwater, which is a lot more affordable to do for the area? Thank you.
Hi, Joe Vovas, Arrowhead Point. I have a very specific question really for Christy on the summary slide that she presented, indicator comparing the 50-year cost of the options A through E, with the bottom line being the comparison to the maintenance and upgrading of septic systems. You had a $110 million price tag on a 50-year operation of 1,100 septic systems. Quick math in my head is that's $100,000 per property. Are you replacing every septic system 3 times over that 50 years? I just can't seem to see how the math adds up.
Way to go, Joe.
Eileen Seaman, 13 Kellogg Street. My question has to do with the payment, how is it possible to charge one property $10,000 and another property $300,000 for the same thing? I think that if this goes forward, although based on what I'm hearing here, it's not going to go forward, but if it were to go forward, I think the payment for it has to be every house paying proportionately the same amount of money. It should not be based on what our real estate taxes are or the grand list. That has nothing to do with this. If I go to Home Depot to buy pipes and somebody else who has a $5 million house goes to buy pipes, we're all going to pay the same thing for those pipes, but not according to the way the WPCA funds things. You say everybody pays a different number, so it's not, how can I say, you're going to have two neighbors, one's paying $10,000 for the new sewers, and the guy across the street is paying $300,000 for the same amount of pipes, the same amount of labor, and there's no way I could go along with this project if the payment for it hasn't been determined. So none of the rest of this counts. As far as I'm concerned, it's just a waste of time if we can't figure out that everybody pays an equal number, not a disproportionate number, but the same amount of money.
Okay, Eric Whitehouse, 82 North Lakeshore Drive. A couple questions for you guys. There was a map you shared earlier that showed some sewers already in the system. I'd just like to get an understanding of who paid for those sewers. So not just the hookup, but also the infrastructure for them. So if that was the town or did the individual homes pay for them? That would be important to know, I think, from a precedent perspective. Secondly, why are we only considering the households in the sewer district as the tax base? I mean, this is a benefit for the entire community. We should be taxing the entire community for them. And I think that that's fairness. Otherwise, it becomes an undue burden on a subset of the population. And then also with that, you're going from 1,100 homes to 6,200 homes, greatly deferring the cost and the burden to the taxpayer that lives in those locations. Again, I believe it's an undue burden. And then also, if you are going to stick to limiting the tax base, just those affected by the sewers, and saying that those are the only ones that are getting this benefit, that benefits all of our beaches and all the boats that go into the lake, which is wrong. But if you're going to limit it just those houses that are going to get the sewer hookups, then are we limiting the decision rights just to the houses that make the sewer hookups? That's an important question, right? Because if we're going to give this to the whole town to decide or just to the board to decide, those people don't have a stake in the game. We should be allowing people to have a stake in the game, make the decision. Thank you very much.
Deirdre Corey again, 57 Skyline. It was told tonight that the WPCA or CDM Smith will be sending a voluntary survey for our feelings on the proposed sewer. Well, Candlewood Shores Tax District and their elected board already did a survey of our own residents, letting the WPCA know very clearly what our results were. We gave this to them in writing and at a public comment at one of their meetings this summer. Our vote that our official board took of our residents had over 50% of our residents responding, and of those respondents, over 90% said no, we don't want survey. So WPCA is assuming our survey was biased and has even said those kind of things tonight, and is discounting our official board action, telling the WPCA no to sewers based on our vote. So to me, it seems that this transparency request is very valid, and turnabout really should be fair play. We will be assuming your survey is biased unless we are given full access and participation in every step of the survey process. In addition, this average for the Candlewood Lake 10 bedroom per acre, just want to let you know, maybe that's something you should survey on too. I live alone in my 3-bedroom house. I've got 10 people around me who live alone in their 3-bedroom houses. The houses on the lake are mostly snowbirders or second homes. They're hardly ever there, or at least not there half the year. So this frightening, idea of, 10 bedrooms per acre really in reality is not practically what's happening in our neighborhood. Thank you.
I'm back, Norman Edelson, 116 North Lakeshore Drive. I was not at the October meeting, but we have a tape recording of C.D. Smith. I don't know who said it from your organization. And after I say it, let me just quote it first. Quote, "Lake is in decent condition, number one. Second, no environmental need for sewers." If this was actually said, I'd never attended, why are we even talking about sewers? If your results who are not written have these comments attached to it. So why are we even here tonight? Thank you.
I'll get him.
James Minor, 18 South Lakeshore Drive again. Mr. Melwich, you made a comment that our results that we did, we took all CDM Smith's numbers, by the way. We used all your calculations. We actually gave you a copy of all the hard work that our engineers and our consultants did, who are professionals. They hold the same degrees as you, and you called them, I think it was voodoo science, and calling us antagonists. I'm sorry, but because we have a difference of opinion of you, we may be in opposition and have a difference of thought and opinion, but we're not antagonists. We are concerned citizens about our own welfare and what this means to us and the cost to us. And the people that we used to debunk your results, you never responded back to us. I find that very interesting, that we gave you everything you asked for. You were supposed to examine our results and get back to us. Crickets. Never heard a word back from you. So, and at some of the WPCA meetings, you even commented that. And I even believe Lombardo, your own engineering, said, and I even have a copy of the letter, and it's off your website, basically saying, it's all tomato, but basically couldn't refute our findings too. So, you know what? I would appreciate some honest answers from you for once and for all, and some answers to how we debunk all your calculations, which you've had now for a year, and we haven't heard anything. So we appreciate it.
Any more public comments? Okay, I'm going to shut the microphone off. It's now 8:40, so we have 20 minutes to hear some responses. Nelson, I'll turn it back over to you.
Well, Joe or Christie?
Sure. Do you want to hear any responses? I mean, it seems like you all, we just did a study. We met with you back last September of 2022, and we were just kicking off the study. We completed it, we presented it. We presented it tonight to tell you what our conclusions were. We said that no sewers were being, in the presentation, we said no sewers were being pushed, and that we were interested for your feedback. You clearly gave lots of feedback today. We appreciate that. We were thinking of sending out a survey. We would still like to wrap up the report. I'm expecting that the survey would come back similar to what all the comments were tonight, that you don't want to move forward with the project. We update the report, stick it on a shelf. I believe it has value. I think that what was done has value. So my question is do you really want me to answer some of these questions or not, or do we want to go home early? All right.
Earn your money.
I'm going to try to rattle through some of the questions, and they were all very good questions. I don't know that I'll get to them all. I know Christy will have to answer some. I mean, there was talks of the capacity and the treatment. That was came through a lot of comments. We had it in our presentation. We made a recommendation to the WPCA that if you were to move forward, the logical place would be to get more capacity from Danbury. The WPCA, they already had hit their capacity at the 380,000 gallons, and they went to Danbury and said, we need 200,000 more. They negotiated with them. They were able to get some additional capacity. It did come at a cost, not tens of millions of dollars, as I said. So that is the first step, but I would not propose to WPCA to go to Danbury right now if you're not going to move forward with the projects. I don't know what more to say to that. The treatment plant costs, you know, the difference between Danbury and what we laid out for treatment plant costs is Danbury is a 9 MGD plant. We were looking at something for what, 300,000 gallons? That's why there's such a difference. There's one's a little grape and one's a big grapefruit, right? You got 9 MGD versus 200,000 gallons. So that was why there's a big disparity there. There were no independent quotes that were done. I think that that is a valid comment. I think that if, again, a lot of these are, if the project actually had any legs or that you wanted it to move forward, I think it is a valid question that a third party looks at the estimates. That's a great question. So I'm going to jump down to the other cost one, which now I'm going to have to just go in order because I don't know where it is. Paving, curb to curb, we assumed paving of 8-foot trenches. This was a sewer project, not a road reconstruction project. We understand that if you were actually going to do the sewer project, you may be interested in getting the road re-repaired. The costs right now are going back to the homeowner, so all it would do is increase the cost. So I understand that. It would make the cost higher. But we typically, with sewer projects, our initial recommendation is to do trench repair. I understand that your comment was that you would want full road reconstruction. I understand that that means that it would cost more. That would mean that it would be more borne by everybody on the project. Why not study first? There were some initial studies. I know that there was a needs analysis. I'm actually going to jump down to the last comment on the prior studies. Your comments weren't directed at CDM Smith's prior study. It was directed at Lombardo's prior study. That was not CDM Smith's study. I don't know where you are in the crowd. So that's why I did not respond to them. What I told the WPCA at the time, and I mentioned it earlier tonight, if you wanted to make it on a needs basis, you'd need a lot more information, you have to do more study, you have to bring people into the room. I don't think that's really where anybody's looking to go right now. So yes, you have a Lombardo study that says one thing, you have a different study that said something else, and we have not brought those two together. So we tried to separate that from our study because that is not what we were hired to do, and that's what we set out from. Estimates, low, who pays? Well, I mean, that answer is, it was pretty obvious from everybody that presented it. We do our best to try to estimate projects. Estimates sometimes are estimates. That was the exact comment that was said. But yes, if an estimate was low and something was higher, it gets borne by the people who are paying the project. So if our estimate is low and it winds up being something higher than that, that would mean that you guys would wind up paying more. We take pride in our estimates. We think that we included everything. It's something we don't take lightly. This is not, we do projects all across the state of Connecticut. We understand that repeat business is like, if I gave a bad estimate to every municipality, they wouldn't continue hiring us. So we don't take our estimates lightly. I don't think that we have issue with our estimate. We're pretty confident with it. But you're right. If something was off, then yes, it would be borne by you. Mandated sewers came up. There is no intention of mandating sewers. We mentioned it in our presentation. Doesn't seem to be the need right now to mandate the sewers. Again, a whole study would need to be done in order to determine that. This was just to present the data to you to get your feedback and potentially fill out the survey, send it back. We can finalize our report. Shared costs beyond the 1,100 homes. That's something I know that Christy and I have brought up to the WPCA as well. There was a lot of cost sharing that was mentioned. And I don't disagree with you. The way that the WPCA does their calculations in the past was it's based on the people who are getting sewered, pay for the sewers, and it's within 10% or less of their assessed value. That's the way they did it. I am going to jump down on this one. I have been involved with many sewer programs, and they're never, ever done the same. I've seen it based on the town picks up the whole project, on the tax base, which is a comment that was made. I've seen it where everybody pays an equal amount, which was a comment that was made. I've seen it where it's based on existing ratepayers and you add the customers. I've seen it where it could be based on road frontage, it could be based on number of bedrooms. There's a number of ways that you can pay for a project. But again, the question right now is definitely left unanswered, but it would need to be answered if you actually want to move forward with a project. There's no point in, we have money left in our study, but we stopped doing the tasks that we're assigned to do just to complete this, to get it to this point. If you're actually interested, we can certainly look to work with the WPCA to answer that question. Okay, who decides project decision? I believe that the project decision is that we presented it to you tonight. I've been saying that, a couple of times. We presented it to you. We wanted you guys to give input on the project. We were going to send a survey. If the survey came back that nobody was interested in the project, we were going to shelf the study and the sewers would not proceed. Economic hardship. I know there was a comment about hardship. I mentioned in my presentation a number of times grants. I usually find with communities, when communities band together, if you're in support of the project and you think it should happen, if your energy was banded together and you went to your state representative, you went to your legislation and you said, we think this project has merit, which I know you're not saying, if you thought the project had merit and if the community was banded together to go forward, that's where you can actually get all this grant money. That's where it comes from. It's not easy for me to go to some, legislator and say, I want to get more money for this client, and that client, because those are my clients. It would be you guys coming forward in banding together and going to them and seeing if there's additional funding out there. And I'm saying that there is additional funding out there right now. There's lots of grant money. But if the project doesn't move forward, there'd be no reason to try to see if that's there. Rock removal. If the reason why we likely would proceed with a shallow sewer is because of the rock that we found, and that's why the gravity sewer did not seem to make sense, because we saw all the rock. The hybrid alternative that Christy mentioned had about half of the area on gravity, half on grinder pumps. I personally would find that a little difficult. You'd be voting on, if you were to vote, whether or not you're automatically going to get a grinder pump, you're automatically going to have gravity based on that option. It seemed like it made more sense to go to the full pressure sewer, but if there was, a strong opinion to move forward with a hybrid condition, then that would be fine too, but that would likely mean more rock removal. So, if a house was to crack during construction, the contractor would be required to repair the house. Not borne on you, not borne on the WPCA. There would be in the specifications, there would be monitoring requirements on the contractor. They'd have to put in monitors on the ground, and if any cracking, there'd be a pre-survey of the houses before we went through, and there'd be a post-survey after we were done. And any cracks in your foundation that occurred after the pre-survey of the construction would need to be repaired by the contractor. Transparency, I disagree with this one, but I feel like we've tried to put everything forward. This is why we're having this public meeting. I thought we were being transparent even by presenting our results. We're not trying to jam anything down anybody's throat. The stormwater comment in related to watershed study, I don't disagree. It just is not the Brookfield WPCA's purview to take on a study like that. That would need to be done on either a town basis, the town of Brookfield, which is different than the Brookfield WPCA, or a regional basis, something like the West Cog, or maybe the Candlewood Light through the Lake organization. A stormwater study, I think, does make a lot of sense, but again, it would not be put forward by the Brookfield WPCA. I'm going to let Christy answer the 50-year life cost, but I'm just going to try to rattle through these. I did the disparity. Who paid before? The property owners who were sewered, the ones that paid before, up to the 10%. The prior survey, I don't actually have the prior survey. I've heard of the results. We just wanted to send out our own survey so that we can include it. It'd be our survey on our, letterhead, so to speak, with WPCA, so we can include the results in the report. That was our reason for doing it. And it would go to all of the 1,100 homes versus just the one area. I talked about the bedrooms, don't agree. The bedrooms don't agree that, yes, that was the comment of, okay, Christy's going to handle the 10 bedrooms. Prior studies, I did that. There was a comment about someone saying no environmental need. I don't know if that was me. I don't know where that came from.
I think
So,
what we said is that I think it's fair that currently the lake overall water quality is not compromised, right? I'm not a lake scientist, I'm not going to pretend to be, but I think overall the lake health is decent right now. I think there were instances, right? Maybe it's better than decent, I don't know, but I think, we had, again, the prior studies that we did not do, and I'm not going to, I can't speak to them in any great detail because I think I'm not qualified for that, but they found instances of elevated bacteria levels, and I think that the town sanitarian also had some information about beach closures being related to E. coli. That's what we put in there. Some very basic information that there is some evidence. The lake overall is in healthy condition right now. Lakes change, they're living things, they change over time. I think part of the point here and part of the concerns that do date back decades is that the conditions exist here with density of development that they could have an impact on the lake. And I know I didn't memorize the 1985 consent order here either, but I think that the consent orders from DEEP often say something about a community pollution problem or potential for a community pollution problem. And it's conditions like this with the dense development near sensitive water bodies that can lead to those concerns. And I think then we go back to Joe's point about this report, if it sits on the shelf for 5 years or 10 years or 20 years and there is a water quality problem down the road, there's a lot of information in here that will still be valid. Obviously the costs will not be very valid 20 years from now, but the lay of the land and the options will still be valid then. So I hope that you can at least also take away that this was not a complete waste, even if this study does not move forward to anything at this point in time. So I hope that that is appreciated. Do you want to do any more? Or you want to? Okay, I'll make. All right. So the 50-year thing, without Joe, Bovis, that's a valid. I understand. Believe me, I double-checked those numbers. So here's what happens with this: the 50-year life cycle, we were assuming about 3% per year for septics. So that's about a 33-year life cycle on the septics. So over 50 years, septics would be replaced on average 1.5 to maybe 2 times. $35,000 now. 4% inflation moving out over that 50-year life. If you replace your septic 20 or 30 years from now, it's over $100,000. So that's how the math works on those 50-year life cycles. So the same thing with the sewer replacements. If any pumps that need to be replaced 20 years from now or 40 years from now, they also cost more at that point in time than they do now. It is more apparent on the septics because of the way the costs are spread and the continuing operations costs, whereas the sewer costs are kind of front-end heavy with the capital costs being now. So that is part of what brings those numbers together. Offline, I'd be happy to look at a big spreadsheet with you and kind of show that. I think that you'll get it, but that's what happens basically. And the other thing that I wanted to address, the 10 bedrooms per acre and people living alone and not all having full-time year-round use. I think that is a valid point, and maybe that is why a lot of people say their septics are actually functioning okay right now. From a public health code standpoint, and again, I'm not a sanitarian, I think you should talk to a sanitarian about that, but public health code dictates that septic systems should be designed based on the number of bedrooms in a house. So you still have to acknowledge that there's a certain amount of space that should be dedicated and a certain amount of separation to groundwater and separation to rock in order to have a code compliant septic system. So that might be.
Was there any questions we didn't answer?
I think maybe we're.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Ed.
Thank you all.
A couple of things. One is the WPCA is obviously interested in community and would try to impose something that's going to be not affordable. And so who decides is probably whoever's going to give them grants in order to make it happen would be one thing. But if they don't come, obviously the project's not going to be affordable and we probably won't proceed. It's not going to be in my tenure. So anyway, the other thing is that we talked about the lake being impaired back in the last decade, in the mid-teens. It was a challenge. It was heavily milfoil, and we were trying to figure out what to do. And Then they added the carp, and that was like a magic miracle to help the lake and the quality of the lake and get it cleared. Well, obviously we couldn't anticipate that when the grants were requested, and they finally came. So, I mean, that's all to the good. One thing, there is a challenge, of course, is that the drinking water is challenged, and so you can address that, and that'll be up to the community and whoever's making the wells, or monitoring and supplying the water. And then the other thing, of course, is that there is some septic failure. When we did the survey originally, the first survey we did, people were complaining, my neighbors, it stinks, you know, would you please help, you know, do something about it. So there was some of that, and then some of them were having to pump every 3 months, and that's a challenge. So, and then they did find human E. coli at the town beach, and so that's, you know, just points to a problem. So anyway, that's the reason why we went ahead and did the work. We've done the work, we've completed it, and the recommendation is not to go forward at this point, and address the septic program, and then the recommendation is for the community to address the septic program. The recommendation is for the community to address the well water, drinking water program, and then we just step out. So that's the recommendation. Now, we couldn't anticipate that the carp would clean up the lake. That was not, and in fact, if you talk to lake scientists now, what's going to happen after the carp and, you know, maybe 10 years from now, nobody can predict it. There's no lake science, you can't predict lake performance like weathermen. It's, you know, it's a problem. And so I think I'm comfortable that we did the right thing in order to get to this point, and we did the study, and we'll put a bow on it, and then, but in addition, the community is on the peninsula and elsewhere is benefited by the fact that we did the topographical work that you didn't have. We did water research, water pipe work that, you know, where you water some, not all of it, but some, and then the idea, there's some misunderstanding about the road paving. Usually when you do low pressure system, you don't put it actually in the road, but a trench next to the road. So you don't even have to refurbish the road. So that would be a detail that, you know, we didn't get to that level yet, but there's some of that. So costs are all in. And then as far as the capacity is concerned, when we bought capacity from Danbury, all sewer users pay a small amount on their use bill, not an assessment, in order to buy that capacity. So there's no cost, and so some of the information out there adds the cost of a waste treatment plant to the cost of the sewer system. That's completely inaccurate. And so as a result, some of that's what's been put out there is untrustworthy. I've asked for some of the comments back from, you know, in writing, and we got nothing. Talk about crickets, that's what we got from you guys. From those that are opposing, we just have those videos and nothing more. No credentials.
Not true,
All of that, we
not
have
true.
nothing.
Not
Well,
true.
we've asked for it, and it's not there.
It's sent to you. It was sent to you. We'll send it to you again.
I don't have it. So anyway, the point is that nevertheless, we're not going forward with the sewers. That's the recommendation at this point. And so, but we did the homework in order to get to that point. And so we're comfortable with the decision, or at least you know, the trajectory at this point. So a warm thank you would be in order. You know, I'm a volunteer, that's it. We did the homework, we got the grants, we got all the people that were, that sponsored the work agreed that it should be done, because the lake is a valuable resource in Connecticut. And the governor wasn't really aware of it when I talked to him about Lake Candlewood, and maybe it's challenged. He wasn't sure where it was. So anyway, it's, oh, maybe, is that in Mark Bountain's area? Yeah, okay, so anyway, that would be, but nevertheless, Brookfield, it's the two biggest lakes are in Brookfield, Candlewood, and Little Nona, and so it was appropriate to do the study, and we've done the study, and now, and so the findings we've shared, and I think CDM Smith did a great job that we asked them to come up with lowest cost of all the options, and they laid them out, and so here we have a detailed level of trying to come up with low-cost options, but their low-cost options aren't low enough in order to really do the project. So what happens is when you build a development out, you put the sewers in on the onset, and then it's affordable. When you retrofit, the lesson is it's not so affordable. So unless you get the grants, so you have to get significant grants. If the lake would be now in the Wall Street Journal, you may have seen last week that the biggest lake in Ireland had blue-green algae and couldn't be used anymore. And so that was really challenged and made the Wall Street Journal. And then, and so other lakes have happened where it's been heavily challenged in America, and they don't really know what happened or why that occurred. And so we just don't want that to happen in Candlewood. We've done our best in order to be able to try to protect the lake, but it looks like other measures, like the carp and that, are really helping out. And so hopefully nothing will happen adversely in our lifetime, but we've done the work, and should it need to be done, the homework is done in order to be able to pick up the pieces so it's a lower cost going in the future. And so that's really the program and what the WPCA has done for Lake Candlewood. Okay, at this point, you're dismissed.